Welcome to Field Notes. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. This month's guests are Vincent Yifulai, who is a full-time practicing architectural designer, formerly with Ajay Associates in New York and now with Trahan Architects, also in New York, as well as Douglas Lee, who is a Master of Architecture candidate at the University of California, Berkeley. Together, they form the design collective Temporary Office, and they are the winners of this year's Forge Prize competition. Their winning concept, Common Sky, was designed to reinvigorate public housing in New York City and Harlem using steel fabrication and modularization. First of all, congratulations on winning the award. And secondly, welcome. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Sure. So let's just start from the beginning. Where are you both from?
So I would start. So I was born and raised in Malaysia, and I immigrated to Singapore at the age of 12. So, it was almost the formative 24 years of my life in Southeast Asia before I come to Berkeley for my grad school.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was born in Vancouver and raised in Hong Kong until 16. And I moved around a little bit after high school, but eventually I ended up doing my undergraduate in London in the UK. And then I moved to Berkeley afterwards for graduate school in 2017. That's where I met Vincent in Berkeley.
So can you talk a little bit about both how you decided to get into architecture? Everybody has their origin story, I guess. Was there a defining moment, or was it sort of more of a gradual process than that?
Yeah, it's very funny. Like, a lot of people ask us this question. Like, some people like, oh, do you know our arts? Like, are you heavily invested in drawing? And I think it was. I mean, my story is a little bit atypical in the sense that I always liked assembling things. So when I was young, we moved a lot. So I was being, called by my dad to fix up a furniture, fix this thing here and there. And so naturally, I was drawn to putting things together. And it doesn't have to be a creation that I created. It doesn't have to be an original creative sort of a process, but rather it's more of figuring things out, how things come together. And then when I was in Singapore, I grew up with this sort of, because it's a very young nation, so we built a lot of public housing and private housing. And so my whole life has always been in this environment where building constantly just pop out of nowhere, and 5 years later you just see it being completely done. And so I was very interested in contributing and learning, what that process is like in a built environment.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, for me, I don't think there was kind of one defining moment that got me into architecture. I think it was mostly small observations that slowly got me interested in the built environment. So similarly to Vincent, I also grew up in kind of a mega city, concrete jungle kind of place. And so I think urban infrastructure was always a fascination. And Hong Kong is sort of built very vertically in a very steep landscape and very limited buildable space. So the built urban environment is actually really interesting relative to kind of its cost of construction and its kind of urban form. And I think my urban planning degree allowed me to tap into the world of design from a more macro perspective. But then I thought that it wasn't tangible enough for me in terms of kind of knowing what is actually getting built. And so I think that ultimately led me to become more interested in design in a more granular level and at an architecture scale. So I think a lot of this influence happened after I started my undergraduate studies in urban planning.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I mean, you're talking all the cities that you've mentioned from your backgrounds: Hong Kong, Singapore, Vancouver, and then now New York. Right, these are all cities that they are all very vertically oriented. So yeah, I would. Right. I mean, I'm sure the whole building landscape in Canada and Singapore and Hong Kong is very different than here, but at the same time, at least you're dealing with a city that prides itself on its density. So Vincent, I was going to ask: is there any particular project that you've worked on that you're proud of, maybe above all others, or maybe one that drove you crazy more than any others?
I think when I started working in 2019. That's when I graduated from Berkeley. I was very fortunate enough to work with Ajay Associates, and we had this project that's highly publicized called the West Heating Plant. So what it is a decommissioned steam heat facility that's turned into residential. And the idea is not to demolish the existing building, but rather to reclad and repurpose the internal gut of the building. And so the outside of the building is made of Corten steel louvers to maximize daylighting, but also at the same time, to pay homage to this formal industrial life of the building. So that was a very interesting project that I got a chance to touch on and work on a little bit of the design phase. So that's the closest steel building experience I got. But it's very much a very vernacular kind of approach to design rather than just building from scratch.
Well, yeah, switching gears then, Douglas, are you wanting to go on and get a PhD, or are you looking to get into research or practice architecture?
Now I think I'm looking to go into practice for a few years at least before I make any decision, going back to school or going to specialize in a particular sector in architecture. But yeah, everything is kind of still up in the air right now, but hopefully I can join Vincent in New York City in the next months. Yeah, full time. So I can work on temporary office stuff with him and also like working on a full-time job in New York City. So that's the plan for now.
Excellent. So speaking of temporary office, can you tell me a little bit about it?
So I think currently it's very much a speculative collaborative, meaning that we're not taking on any commission built work yet. So I think we started off this. We had the inception back when we were in school. Like we always wanted to do competition. We always wanted to test ideas. But during the pandemic, we really started, toying with the idea of, what it could be. And so in a way, the collaborative doesn't have a certain dogma. There is no certain sort of structure to how we approach a design. It's more of, a very free-form way of creating the sort of process and a stick to the process throughout all the way to the completion. People ask us what temporary office is, like specifically temporary. It's kind of funny, right? Like, why would you create something that's so temporary and just goes away and disappear in the thin air? But I think also the word temporary is a way to like debunk the current culture of practice. Like designers are not limited to just working full time in office, but rather all our collaborations, we always encourage people to go out and seek inspiration. And then the office itself, or the place where we meet over Zoom, is more of just consolidating the ideas. It's more about testing things out and consolidating and discussing it out. So it's a framework for what we want to build for the future of practice, right? I mean, I can go a little bit deeper into this. There's this idea of a decentralized autonomous organization, very, very popular in crypto world. And so we always try to encourage the designer to take ownership of the project. So everyone has a stake in the project, they can lead it. And we, as sort of the founders of the collaborative, we come in as a sort of a supporting cast to make that project into a level that, we need to produce at the end of the day.
Okay.
And I think Vincent puts it very well in a more kind of a concrete way of what our office is about. But I think in a more kind of literal, kind of playful way, I think temporary for us kind of invokes a kind of a feeling of playfulness that although we're serious about our work, we're also kind of like freeing ourselves and setting loose so we can kind of explore all topics, even outside of architecture. And also, we started the office in a time of uncertainty. So we started back in 2020, where COVID just started. And kind of temporary is kind of a reflection of that state where we don't really know what's going to happen in the future, but we're also like, we're open-minded to kind of try new things, working collaboratively on different continents, working with different people. So there's this sense of just open-mindedness behind the name of the office.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, so can you talk a little bit about Common Sky then? Was this an idea that you've had for a while, or was it solely conceived for the competition?
We initially had the concept that was specifically applicable to post-war social housing in London. So that was like the first iteration for this particular concept. And this is sort of the second adaptation of that concept to the American context and specifically to New York City. And I think the point of departure for this project was that we see that a lot of shared amenity spaces in these social housing was really underutilized, undermaintained, and somewhat uninviting. And a good example of that would be Robin Hood Gardens and Alton Estate in London, and also the Riverton Gardens in Harlem, which this project is based in. And we also see that a lot of these spaces are actually drivers for social interaction and kind of the deciding factor whether a housing project is performing well or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the focus of that project becomes one that is how we find a way to celebrate this by thinking of new ways to sort of create dynamic shared space of all scales where people would want to spend time in. So it's inviting to create this very vibrant environment in between people's units, but also creating kind of large space, sort of this thing called that we call it common sky.
Yeah.
That like a big kind of common space with a lot of really exciting amenities like shared libraries, cafes, urban gardens, urban farms that people kind of come together whenever they want to.
And we also felt like it's also taking something that we learn and we see in our childhood. So, many of these typologies are tested and applied in Asia, right? So in Asia, there's a lot of, I can quote one, which is not a very good example, but there is this Marina Bay Sands in Singapore where this super big sky garden was built on top of this 3-tower hotel. But on a more residential level, even in Singapore, there's this project called Pinnacle at Duxton, which is it's a big public housing project. And what it does is in the intermediate level and the top level, it's all open to public. So meaning that even if you don't live in that residential building, you can pay a certain fee to go into that building and go up to this intermediate level in the roof terrace to mingle with the residents over there. So in a sense, there is already projects out there that tries to sort of recalibrate this sort of social activity between private and public. So we thought that that was a really good agency and an ingredient that we sort of can bring into public housings that are degenerated and that needs revitalization, right? This sort of social aspect of it.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say, I think unfortunately, a lot of people have when they hear the phrase public housing, they get a bit of a negative image and they think of buildings that are not particularly invigorating or inspiring. So this approach to it is you're looking at something that's a public housing facility, but it's very inspiring. It's the kind of place that you look and go, wow, this is. We
try to make it fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
We always try to make it fun. Yeah.
So speaking of the project, I understand you all worked with one of our AISC member fabricators, Steel LLC, to develop the concept. And I'm just curious, was this your first time working directly with a steel fabricator?
Yeah, it's very much the first time.
First time for sure.
Can you describe the experience a little bit?
Yeah, it's super enriching experience because we start off with a lot of dialogues and just building mutual consensus around what we had for a design direction. So Rob Williams, who is our mentor from Steel LLC, he was very quick to respond to the design vision and try to assimilate sort of his suggestions to what we try to start off with. But I think it quickly moved into a sort of a collaborative process where we try to adapt, the sort of like real world techniques that's been done on steel buildings, and there's a lot of back and forth in that process. So in the end, it was a hybrid sort of. It was an idea that's born out of this collaboration instead of like architects saying what they want and then a structural engineer just try to solve it, right? So it was the other way around.
When it comes to the design, you're creating a new housing block top. It's Riverton Square in Harlem. And I was just curious, did you have why that building in particular? Was there a personal connection, or were you just kind of looking around for existing kind of developments and said, aha, this would be the perfect place to try to implement something like this?
So we look into Harlem because it has a rich history of gentrification, sometime around 1980s. And that place gone through a great transformation. It was formerly infested with, drugs, high crime rate, et cetera, et cetera. And so after 1980s with, this new incoming infrastructure and obviously also much more unaffordable luxury housing. And that created also very limited job markets that doesn't necessarily appeal to the local community of Harlem, right? So that sort of like top-down strategy of this development left many Harlem residents, feeling disempowered,
Sure.
Right. So this idea that, the Harlem residents are trying to do something to the community, that they're just trying to create identity, but has no ability to, because all this sort of top-down developments are ongoing. And so we thought about that as an opportunity to create a new typology that can recalibrate this to polarizing power, right? So the Common Sky was an opportunity to create a scaffold for the Harlem community to build for themselves and to recalibrate that polarity and to build something that, they can call it their own.
Yeah, and I think in New York specifically, and also at large in the United States, there's a lot of sort of social housing that is going into decay, but a lot of opportunity to kind of invigorate those places, those buildings, to kind of serve as a scaffold that Vincent mentioned for this new kind of housing. So we're taking that history and kind of reinvigorating so that there's new life within the old building, but also kind of serving as an opportunity to have housing supply in the United States. And so Riverton was sort of a point of departure for us in this investigation. And so sort of why we chose Riverton and Harlem was because of the strict geometry and kind of the simple built form that provided a good canvas for us to design a first iteration. And I think after this first step, I think our view was to adapt this method a lot of other states around New York City, but also around major cities in the US. For me, I haven't really worked on a real life modular project before, but I think this theme was always a recurring topic for us. I think it kind of started out on the high-tech architecture paper that we first worked together initially, kind of focused on modularity from the Pompidou Museum in Paris, right? And I think kind of modularity becomes a timely topic for us because in a time where architecture as a field is called to think more sustainably and sort of the focus on readapting an existing building becomes a much more popular theme in architecture today and makes more sense than just tearing down and building anew. And also, I think one of the focuses that we had for Riverton was that it was a way to pay homage and to celebrate its history as part of New York's ever-changing urban fabric. So it's really to respect that culture, that history, and to just build on something that was already provided to us as a blank canvas.
Yeah, I mean, modularity also means it's a very rudimentary sort of envelope that encompasses, say, one person, right? A person living in it. So that one unit is one module, and the sort of DNA of New York is all about densification. How do you maximize the volume in a certain given footprint? And so this idea that modularity in New York, which is part of the DNA, is so efficient, but how do you create a different in it, right? How do you create the sort of nuances in modularity that sparks new life, new community engagement, new sort of a community growth? I think that's what is interesting to us. It's not just about adding onto the numbers, but what kind of the in-between zero, like the in-between, it's not binary. It's what is the sort of decimal that you can extract from this binary system.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're really interested in kind of the speed of construction and kind of flexibility in configurations and sort of more sustainable methods of construction. And that really relates back to kind of the need for housing supply with a very kind of urgent kind of sense. And so I think we're just trying to kind of explore this topic more, just to kind of tap into the potential of modular housing to kind of respond to the ever-changing demographics and sort of supplying the housing as quick as we can.
Well, yeah, thank you. Just the last question. I was just curious, since you both lived in Berkeley, are there any best kept secrets that you can reveal about Berkeley, or what are some of the things you enjoy about it?
Right. Vincent, you want to go first?
Berkeley? I think, I mean, growing up in the metropolis for our entire life and moving to Berkeley was a huge jump, right? Was definitely a huge difference. And I think it was a great incubator for a lot of students found it very enriching in the sense that there was a lot of freedom to test and talk about ideas. And so I think the charm of Berkeley is that there is this space where people are not shy to just do crazy stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Always kind of been known for that, I guess.
Yeah, but also for architecture, it can be very positive.
Well, what about New York then? Same question.
New York. I think after 2 years, I'm bored of that quiet space. So,
Sure.
but no. I think New York was a very natural transition because um, I think for my growth, I'm always curious to see what's the difference between the West Coast and the East Coast. And so working in New York was a natural sort of transition from the academic to the professional, right? And also the people here, and I think the access to people from diverse background and profession is just incredible. You know, I can talk to someone who is in architecture in the afternoon, but then at night I could hang out with someone in tech, and then I can get drunk with someone from Wall Street. Like they're just totally people from diverse background, but also at the same time very enriching experience. Yeah.